yard, and there were only present Monsieur le Vicomte and Anatole, the latter reflecting the look of sorrow that haunted his master's face. The captain's generosity was certainly leading him beyond the bounds of his authority, and it touched me. "Monsieur is very generous," said I. He shrugged his shoulders impatiently. "Cap de Dieu!" he cried. He had a way of swearing that reminded me of my friend Cazalet. "It is no generosity, monsieur. It is a desire to make this obscene work more congenial to the spirit of a gentleman, which, devil take me, I cannot stifle, not for the king himself. And then, Monsieur de L'Esperance, are we not fellow countrymen? Are we not Gascons both? Pardieu, there is no more respected name in the whole of Gascony than that of L'Esperance, and that you belong to so honorable a family is alone more than sufficient to warrant such slight favors as it may be in my power to show you. You have my parole that I will attempt no escape, Monsieur le Capitaine," I answered, bowing my acknowledgment of his compliments. "I am Myronsac de Castelrix, of Chateau Rouge in Gascony," he informed me, returning my bow. My faith, had he not made a pretty soldier, he would have made an admirable master of deportment. My leave-taking of Monsieur de Laverton was brief but cordial, apologetic on my part, intensely sympathetic on his. And so I went out alone with Castelrix upon the road to Toulouse, his men being ordered to follow in half an hour's time, and to travel at their leisure. As we cantered along, Castelrix and I, we talked of many things, and I found him an amusing and agreeable companion. Had my mood been other than despairing, the news he gave me might have occasioned me some concern, for it seemed that prisoners arraigned for treason and participation in the late rising were being very summarily treated. Many were never so much as heard in their own defense, the evidence collected of their defection being submitted to the tribunal, and judgment being forthwith passed upon them by judges who had no ears for anything they might advance in their own favor. The evidence of my identity was complete. There was my own admission to Castelrix. The evidence of the treason of L'Esperance was none the less complete. In fact, it was notorious, and there was the Duke's letter found amongst my effects. If the judges refused to lend an ear to my assurances that I was not L'Esperance at all, but the missing Bardelys, my troubles were likely to receive a very summary solution. The fear of it, however, weighed not over heavily upon me. I was supremely indifferent. Life was at an end so far as I was concerned. I had ruined the one chance of real happiness that had ever been held out to me, and if the gentlemen of the courts of Toulouse were pleased to send me unheeded to the scaffold, what should it signify? But there was another matter that did interest me, and that was my interview with Marsac. Touching this, I spoke to my captor. "There is a gentleman I wish to see at Grenade this morning. You have amongst the papers taken from me a letter making this assignation, Monsieur le Capitaine, and I should be indeed grateful if you would determine that we shall break our fast there, so that I may have an opportunity of seeing him. The matter is to me of the highest importance." "It concerns," he asked, "a lady." I answered, "Ah, yes, but the letter is of the nature of a challenge, is it not? Naturally, I cannot permit you to endanger your life, lest we disappoint the headsman at Toulouse." I laughed. "Have no fear. There shall be no duel." "Then I am content, monsieur, and you shall see your friend." I thanked him, and we talked of other things thereafter as we rode in the early morning along the Toulouse road. Our conversation found its way, I scarce know how, to the topic of Paris and the court, and when I casually mentioned in passing that I was well acquainted with the Luxembourg, he inquired whether I had ever chanced to meet a young spark of the name of Myronsac. Myronsac, I echoed. "Why, yes." And I was on the point of adding that I knew the youth intimately, and what a kindness I had for him, when, deeming it imprudent, I contented myself with asking, "You know him?" "Pardieu," he swore. "The fellow is my cousin. We are both Myronsacs. He is Myronsac of Castelvert, whilst I, as you may remember I told you, am Myronsac of Castelrix. To distinguish us, he is always known as Myronsac, and I as Castelrix. Peste! It is not the only distinction, for while he basks in the sunshine of the great world of Paris, they are wealthy, the Myronsacs of Castelvert. I, a poor devil of a Gascony cadet, am playing the catchpole in Languedoc." I looked at him with fresh interest, for the mention of that dear lad Myronsac brought back to my mind a night in Paris on which my ill-starred wager had been laid, and I was reminded of how that high-minded youth had sought, when it was too late to reason me out of the undertaking by alluding to the dishonor with which his honest eyes it must be fraught. We spoke of his cousin, Castlerex, and I went so far now as to confess that I had some love for the youth, whom I praised in unmistakable terms. This inclined to increase the friendliness which my young captain had manifested since my arrest, and I was presently emboldened by it to beg of him to add to the many favors that I already owed him by returning to me the portrait which his men had subtracted from my pocket. It was my wish to return this to Marsac, whilst at the same time it would afford corroboration of my story. To this Castlerex made no difficulty. "Why, yes," said he, and he produced it. "I crave your pardon for not having done the thing of my own accord. What can the keeper of the seals want with that picture?" I thanked him and pocketed the locket. "Poor lady," he sighed, a note of compassion in his voice. "By my soul, Monsieur de l'Esperon, fine work this for soldiers, is it not? Diable, it is enough to turn a gentleman's stomach sour for life, and make him go hide himself in the eyes of honest men. Had I known that soldiering meant such business, I had thought twice before I adopted it as a career for a man of honor. I had remained in Gascony and tilled the earth sooner than have lent myself to this." "My good young friend," I laughed, "what you do in the king's name." "So does every tipstaff," he answered impatiently, his mustaches bristling as a result of the scornful twist he gave his lips. "To think that I should have a hand in bringing tears to the eyes of that sweet lady. Quel besson! Bon Dieu, quel besson!" I laughed at the distress vented in that whimsical Gascon tongue of his, whereupon he eyed me in a wonder that was tempered with admiration, for to his brave soul a gentleman so stoical as to laugh under such parlous circumstances was very properly a gentleman to be admired. Chapter 10. The Risen Dead. It was close upon 10 o'clock as we rode into the yard of the imposing Hotel de la Couronne at Grenade. Castlerex engaged a private room on the first floor, a handsome chamber overlooking the courtyard. And in answer to the inquiries that I made, I was informed by the landlord that Monsieur de Marsac was not yet arrived. "My assignation was before noon, Monsieur de Castlerex," said I. "With your permission, I would wait until noon." He made no difficulty. 2 hours were of no account. We had all risen very early, and he was himself, he said, entitled to some rest. Whilst I stood by the window, it came to pass that a very tall, indifferently apparelled gentleman issued from the hostelry and halted for some moments in conversation with the ostler below. He walked with an enfeebled step and leaned heavily for support upon a stout cane. As he turned to re-enter the inn, I had a glimpse of a face woefully pale, about which, as about the man's whole figure, there was a something that was familiar, a something that puzzled me, and on which my mind was still dwelling when presently I sat down to breakfast with Castlerex. It may have been a half-hour later, and, our meal being at an end, we were sitting talking. I grow impatient the while that this Monsieur de Marsac should keep me waiting so, when a sudden rattle of hoofs drew me once more to the window. A gentleman, riding very recklessly, had just dashed through the porte-cochere and was in the act of pulling up his horse. He was a lean, active man, very richly dressed, and with a face that by its swarthiness of skin and the sable hue of beard and hair looked almost black. "Ah, you are there," he cried, with something between a snarl and a laugh, and addressing somebody within the shelter of the porch. "Par la mort Dieu, I had hardly looked to find you." From the recess of the doorway, I heard a gasp of amazement and a cry of, "Marsac, you here?" So this was the gentleman I was to see. A stable boy had taken his reins, and he leapt nimbly to the ground. Into my range of vision hobbled now the enfeebled gentleman whom earlier I had noticed. "My dear Stanislas," he cried, "I cannot tell you how rejoiced I am to see you." And he approached Marsac with arms that were opened as if to embrace him. The newcomer surveyed him a moment in wonder, with eyes grown dull. Then abruptly raising his hand, he struck the fellow on the breast and thrust him back so violently that but for the stable boy's intervention he had of a certainty fallen. With a look of startled amazement on his haggard face, the invalid regarded his assailant. As for Marsac, he stepped close up to him. "What is this?" he cried harshly. "What is this make-believe feebleness? That you are pale, poltroon, I do not wonder. But why these tottering limbs? Why this assumption of weakness? Do you look to trick me by these signs? Have you taken leave of your senses?" exclaimed the other, a note of responsive anger sounding in his voice. Have you gone mad, Stanislas? Abandon this pretense, was a contemptuous answer. 2 days ago at Lavedon, my friend, they informed me how complete was your recovery. From what they told us, it was easy to guess why you tarried there and left us without news of you. That was my reason, as you may have surmised, for writing to you. My sister has mourned you for dead, was mourning you for dead, while she sat at the feet of your Roxelane and made love to her among the roses of Lavedon. Lavedon? Echoed the other slowly. Then, raising his voice, "What the devil are you saying?" he blazed. "What do I know of Lavedon?" In a flash it had come to me who that enfeebled gentleman was. Rodnard, the blunderer, had been at fault when he had said that Lesperon had expired. Clearly he could have no more than swooned. For here, in the flesh, was Lesperon himself, the man I had left for dead in that barn by Mirepoix. How or where he had recovered were things at the moment did not exercise my mind, nor have I since been at any pains to unravel the mystery of it. But there he was, and for the moment that fact was all sufficing. What complications would come of his presence heaven alone could foretell. "Put an end to this play-acting," roared the savage Marsac. "It will avail you nothing. My sister's tears may have weighed lightly with you, but you shall pay the price of them, and of the slight you have put upon her." "My God, Marsac!" cried the other, roused to an equal fierceness. "Will you explain?" "Aye," snarled Marsac, and his sword flashed from his scabbard. "I'll explain. As God lives, I'll explain with this." And he whirled his blade under the eyes of the invalid. "Come, my master, the comedy's played out. Cast aside that crutch and draw. Draw, man, or sang you. I'll run you through as you stand." There was a commotion below. The landlord and a posse of his satellites, waiters, ostlers, and stable boys, rushed between them and sought to restrain the bloodthirsty Marsac. But he shook them off as a bull shakes off a pack of dogs, and like an angry bull, too, did he stand his ground and bellow. In a moment his sweeping sword had cleared a circle about him. In its lightning dartings hither and thither at random, it had stung a waiter in the calf, and when the fellow saw the blood staining his hose, he added to the general din his shrieks that he was murdered. Marsac swore and threatened in a breath, and a kitchen wench, from a point of vantage on the steps, called shame upon him and abused him roundly for a cowardly assassin to assail a poor sufferer who could hardly stand upright. "Pecap did you?" swore Casterix at my elbow. "Saw you ever such an ado?" What his chance? But I never stayed to answer him. Unless I acted quickly, blood would assuredly be shed. I was the one man who could explain matters, and it was a mercy for Lesperon that I should have been at hand in the hour of his meeting that fire-eater Marsac. I forgot the circumstances in which I stood to Casterix. I forgot everything but the imminent necessity that I should intervene. Some 7 feet below our window was the roof of the porch. From that to the ground it might be some 8 feet more. Before my Gascon captain knew what I was about, I had swung myself down from the window onto the projecting porch. A second later, I created a diversion by landing in the midst of the courtyard fray, with the alarmed Casterix, who imagined that I was escaping, following by the same unusual road, and shouting as he came, "Monsieur de Lesperon." "Hi, Monsieur de Lesperon. Mordieu, remember your parole, Monsieur de Lesperon." Nothing could have been better calculated to stem Marsac's fury. Nothing could have so predisposed him to lend an ear to what I had to say, for it was very evident that Casterix's words were addressed to me, and that it was I whom he called by the name of Lesperon. In an instant I was at Marsac's side, but before I could utter a word, "What the devil does this mean?" he asked, eyeing me with fierce suspicion. "It means, monsieur, that there are more Lesperons than one in France. I am the Lesperon who was at Lavedon. If you doubt me, ask this gentleman who arrested me there last night. Ask him, too, why we have halted here. Ask him, if you will, to show you the letter that you left at Lavedon making an assignation here before noon today, which letter I received." The suspicion faded from Marsac's eyes, and they grew round with wonder as he listened to this prodigious array of evidence. Lesperon looked on in no less amazement. Yet I am sure from the manner of his glance that he did not recognize in me the man that had succored him at Mirepoix. That, after all, was natural enough, for the minds of men in such reduced conditions as had been his upon that night are not prone to receive very clear impressions, and still less prone to retain such impressions as they do receive. Before Marsac could answer me, Casterix was at my side. 8,000 apologies, he laughed. A fool might have guessed the errand that took you so quickly through that window, and none but a fool would have suspected you of seeking to escape. It was unworthy in me, Monsieur de Lesperon. I turned to him while those others still stood gaping and led him aside. Monsieur le Capitaine, said I, you find it troublesome enough to reconcile your conscience with such arrests as you are charged to make. Is it not so? Mordieu, he cried, by way of emphatically assenting. Now, if you should chance to overhear words betraying to you certain people whom otherwise you would never suspect of being rebels, your soldier's duty would, nevertheless, compel you to apprehend them, would it not? Why, true. I am afraid it would, he answered, with a grimace. But if forewarned that by being present in a certain place you should overhear such words, what course would you pursue? Avoid it like a pestilence, monsieur, he answered promptly. Then, Monsieur le Capitaine, may I trespass upon your generosity to beseech you to let me take these litigants to our room upstairs, and to leave us alone there for a half-hour? Frankness was my best friend in dealing with Casterix. Frankness and his distaste of the business they had charged him with. As for Marsac and Lesperon, they were both eager enough to have the mystery explained. And when Casterix having consented, I invited them to my chamber, they came readily enough. Since Monsieur de Lesperon did not recognize me, there was no reason why I should enlighten him touching my identity, and every reason why I should not. As soon as they were seated, I went to the heart of the matter at once, and without preamble. But there were reasons for which I trust you will not press me, since I shall find it difficult to answer you with truth. But is your name Lesperon? Cried Lesperon. That, monsieur, is a small matter, whether my name is Lesperon or not. I confess to having practiced a duplicity upon the Vicomte and his family, since I am certainly not the Lesperon whose identity I accepted. But if I accepted that identity, monsieur, I also accepted your liabilities. And so I think that you should find in your heart to extend me some measure of forgiveness. As Renaud de Lesperon, of Lesperon in Gascony, I was arrested last night at Lavardin, and, as you may observe, I am being taken to Toulouse to stand a charge of high treason. I have not demurred. I have not denied in the hour of trouble the identity that served me in my hour of need. I am taking the bitter with the sweet, and I assure you, gentlemen, that the bitter predominates in a very marked degree. But this must not be, cried Lesperon, rising. I know not what use you may have made of my name, but I have no reason to think that you can have brought discredit upon it. And so, I thank you, monsieur, and so I cannot submit that you shall go to Toulouse in my stead. Where is this officer whose prisoner you are? Pray summon him, monsieur, and let us set the matter right. This is very generous, I answered calmly, but I have crimes enough upon my head, and so, if the worst should befall me, I am simply atoning in one person for the errors of two. But that is no concern of mine, he cried. It is so much your concern that if you commit so egregious a blunder as to denounce yourself, you will have ruined yourself without materially benefiting me. He still objected. But in this strain I argued for some time, and to such good purpose that in the end I made him realize that by betraying himself he would not save me, but only join me on the journey to the scaffold. Besides, gentlemen, I pursued, my case is far from hopeless. I have every confidence that, as matters stand, by putting forth my hand at the right moment, by announcing my identity at the proper season, I can, if I am so inclined, save my neck from a headsman. If you are so inclined, they both cried, their looks charged with inquiry. Let that be, I answered. It does not at present concern us. What I desire you to understand, Monsieur de Lesperon, is that if I go to Toulouse alone, when the time comes to proclaim myself, and it is found that I am not Renaud de Lesperon, of Lesperon in Gascony, they will assume that you are dead, and there will be no count against me. But if you come with me, and thereby afford proof that you are alive, my impersonation of you may cause me trouble. They may opine that I have been in a bed of treason, that I have attempted to circumvent the ends of justice, and that I may have impersonated you in order to render possible your escape. For that, you may rest assured they will punish me. You will see, therefore, that my own safety rests on your passing quietly out of France and leaving the belief behind you that you are dead, a belief that will quickly spread once I shall cast off your identity. You apprehend me? Vaguely, monsieur, and perhaps you are right. What do you say, Stanislas? Say, cried the fiery Marsac. I am weighed down with shame, my poor René, for having so misjudged you. Maury would have said in the same strain, but Lesperone cut him short and bade him attend to the issue now before him. They discussed it at some length, but always under a cloud in which my mysteriousness enveloped it, and in the end, encouraged by my renewed assurances that I could best save myself if Lesperone were not taken with me, the Gascon consented to my proposals. Marsac was on his way to Spain. His sister, he told us, awaited him at Carcassonne. Lesperone should set out with him at once, and in 48 hours they would be beyond the reach of the king's anger. I have a favor to ask of you, Monsieur de Marsac, said I, rising, for our business was at an end. It is that if you should have an opportunity of communicating with Mademoiselle de Lavedin, you will let her know that I am not the Lesperone that is betrothed to your sister. I will inform her of it, monsieur, he answered readily, and then of a sudden, a look of understanding and of infinite pity came into his eyes. My God, he cried, what is it, monsieur? I asked, staggered by that sudden outcry. Do not ask me, monsieur, do not ask me. I had forgotten for the moment, in the excitement of all these revelations. But he stopped short. Well, monsieur? He seemed to ponder a moment, then looking at me again with that same compassionate glance. You had better know, said he, and yet it is a difficult thing to tell you. I understand now much that I had not dreamed of. You have no suspicion of how you came to be arrested? For my alleged participation in the late rebellion? Yes. But who gave the information of your whereabouts? Who told the keeper of the seals where you were to be found? Oh, that? I answered easily. Why, I never doubted it. It was a coxcomb St. Eustache. I whipped him. I stopped short. There was something in Marsac's black face, something in his glance, that forced the unspoken truth upon my mind. Mother in heaven, I cried, do you mean that it was Mademoiselle de Lavedin? He bowed his head in silence. Did she hate me, then, so much as that? Would nothing less than my death appease her? And had I utterly crushed the love that for a little while she had borne me, that she could bring herself to hand me over to the headsman? God, what a stab was that! It turned me sick with grief. Aye, and with some rage, not against her. Oh, not against her, against the fates that had brought such things to pass. I controlled myself while their eyes were yet upon me. I went to the door and held it open for them, and they, perceiving something of my disorder, were courteous enough to omit the protracted leave-takings that under other auspices there might have been. Marsac paused a moment on the threshold, as if he would have offered me some word of comfort. Then, perceiving perhaps how banal must be all comfort that was of words alone, and how it might but increase the anger of the wound it was meant to balm, he sighed a simple adieu, monsieur, and went his way. When they were gone, I returned to the table, and, sitting down, I buried my head in my arms, and there I lay, a prey to the most poignant grief that in all my easy, fortunate life I had ever known. That she should have done this thing. That the woman I loved, the pure, sweet, innocent girl that I had wooed so ardently in my unworthiness at Lavedin, should have stooped to such an act of betrayal. To what had I not reduced her? Since such things could be, then, out of my despair grew comfort, slowly at first and more vigorously anon. The sudden shock of the news had robbed me of some of my wit and had warped my reasoning. Later, as the pain of the blow grew duller, I came to reflect that what she had done was but a proof, an overwhelming proof, of how deeply she had cared. Such hatred as this can be but born of a great love. Reaction is ever to be measured by the action that occasions it, and a great revulsion can only come of great affection. Had she been indifferent to me, or had she but entertained for me a passing liking, she would not have suffered so. And so I came to realize how cruel must have been the pang that had driven her to this. But she had loved me. Aye, and she loved me still, for all that she thought she hated, and for all that she had acted as if she hated. But even if I were wrong, even if she did hate me, what a fresh revulsion would not be hers when anon she learnt that, whatever my sins, I had not played lightly with her love, that I was not, as she had imagined, the betrothed of another woman. The thought fired me like wine. I was no longer listless, no longer indifferent as to whether I lived or died. I must live. I must enlighten the keeper of the seals and the judges at Toulouse concerning my identity. Why? Indeed, had I ever wavered. Bardelys the Magnificent must come to life again, and then, what then? As suddenly as I had been exalted, was I cast down. There was a rumor abroad that Bardelys was dead. In the wake of that rumor, I shrewdly guessed that the report of the wager that had brought him into Languedoc would not be slow to follow. What then? Would she love me any the better? Would she hate me any the less? If now she was wounded by the belief that I had made sport her love, would not that same belief be with her again when she came to know the truth? Aye! The tangle was a grievous one. Yet I took heart. My old resolve returned to me, and I saw the need for urgency. In that alone could lie now my redemption in her eyes. My wager must be paid before I again repair to her, for all that it should leave me poor indeed. In the meanwhile, I prayed God that she might not hear it ere I returned to tell her. Chapter 11. The King's Commissioner. For that most amiable of Gascon cadets, Monsieur de Casterix, I have naught but the highest praise. In his every dealing with me, he revealed himself so very gallant, generous, and high-minded a gentleman that it was little short of a pleasure to be his prisoner. He made no inquiries touching the nature of my interview with those two gentlemen at the Hotel de la Couronne, and when at the moment of leaving I requested him to deliver a packet to the taller of those same two, he did so without comment or question. That packet contained the portrait of Mademoiselle de Marsac, but on the inner wrapper was a note requesting Lesperon not to open it until he should be in Spain. Neither Marsac nor Lesperon did I see again before we resumed our journey to Toulouse. At the moment of setting out, a curious incident occurred. Casterix's company of dragoons had ridden into the courtyard as we were mounting. They lined up under their lieutenant's command to allow us to pass, but as we reached the porte cochere, we were delayed for a moment by a traveling carriage, entering for relays and coming, apparently, from Toulouse. Casterix and I backed our horses until we were in the midst of the dragoons, and so we stood while the vehicle passed in. As it went by, one of the leather curtains was drawn back, and my heart was quickened by the sight of a pale girl face, with eyes of blue and brown curls lying upon the slender neck. Her glance lighted on me, swordless, and in the midst of that company of troopers, and I bowed low upon the withers of my horse, doffing my hat in distant salutation. The curtain dropped again and eclipsed the face of the woman that had betrayed me. With my mind full of wild surmisings as to what emotions might have awakened in her upon beholding me, I rode away in silence at Monsieur de Casterix's side. Had she experienced any remorse? Any shame? Whether or not such feelings had been aroused at sight of me, it certainly would not be long ere she experienced them. For at the Hotel de la Couronne were those who would enlighten her. The contemplation of the remorseful grief that might anon beset her when she came to ponder the truth of matters, and, with that truth, those things that at Laverton I had uttered, filled me presently with regret and pity. I grew impatient to reach Toulouse and tell the judges of the mistake that there had been. My name could not be unknown to them, and the very mention of it, I thought, should suffice to give them pause and lead them to make inquiries before sending me to the scaffold. Yet I was not without uneasiness, for the summariness with which Casterix had informed me they were in the habit of dealing with those accused of high treason occasioned me some apprehensive pangs. This apprehension led me to converse with my captor touching those trials, seeking to gather from him who were the judges. I learnt then that besides the ordinary tribunal, a commissioner had been dispatched by His Majesty and was hourly expected to arrive at Toulouse. It would be his mission to supervise and direct the inquiries that were taking place. It was said, he added, that the king himself was on his way thither, to be present at the trial of Monsieur le Duc de Montmorency, but he was traveling by easy stages, and was not yet expected for some days. My heart, which had leapt at the news, as suddenly sank again with the consideration that I should probably be disposed of before the king's arrival. It would behoove me, therefore, to look elsewhere for help and for someone to swear to my identity. Do you know the name of this king's commissioner? I asked. It is a certain Comte de Châtellerault, a gentleman man said to stand very high in His Majesty's favor. Châtellerault, I cried in wondering joy. You know him? Most excellently. I laughed. We are very intimately acquainted. Why? Then, monsieur, I augur you this gentleman's friendship, and that it may pilot you through your trouble. Although, being mercifully minded, he stopped short. But I laughed easily. Indeed, my dear captain, I think it will, said I. although friendship in this world is a thing which the unfortunate know little. But I rejoiced too soon, as you shall hear. We rode diligently on, our way lying along the fertile banks of the Garonne, now yellow with the rustling corn. Towards evening we made our last halt at Fenouillet, when a couple of hours' riding should bring us to Toulouse. At the post-house we overtook a carriage that seemingly had halted for relays, but upon which I scarce bestowed a glance as I alighted. Whilst Casterix went to arrange for fresh horses, I strode into the common room, and there for some moments I stood discussing the vines with our host. When at last I had resolved that a cold pasty and a bottle of Armagnac would satisfy our wants, I looked about me to take survey of those in the room. One group in a remote corner suddenly riveted my attention to such a degree that I remained deaf to the voice of Casterix, who had just entered and who stood now beside me. In the center of this group was the Comte de Châtellerault himself, a thick-set, somber figure, dressed with that funereal magnificence he affected. But it was not the sight of him that filled me with amazement, for that Casterix's information had prepared me, and I well understood in what capacity he was there. My surprise sprang rather from the fact that amongst a half-dozen gentlemen about him, and evidently in attendance, I beheld the Chevalier de Saint-Eustache. Now, knowing as I did the Chevalier's treasonable leanings, there was ample cause for my astonishment at finding him in such company. Apparently, too, he was on very intimate terms with the Count, for in raising my glance I had caught him in the act of leaning over to whisper familiarly in Châtellerault's ear. Their eyes, indeed, for that matter the eyes of the entire company, were turned in my direction. Perhaps it was not a surprising thing that Châtellerault should gaze upon me in that curious fashion, for was it not probable that he had heard that I was dead? Besides, the fact that I was without a sword, and that at my side stood a king's officer, afforded evidence enough of my condition, and well might Châtellerault stare at beholding me so manifestly a prisoner. Even as I watched him, he appeared to start at something that St. Eustache was saying, and a curious change spread over his face. Its whilom expression had been rather one of dismay, for, having believed me dead, he no doubt accounted his wager won, whereas seeing me alive had destroyed that pleasant conviction. But now it took on a look of relief, and of something that suggested malicious cunning. "That," said Casterix in my ear, "is the king's commissioner. Did I not know it?" I never waited to answer him, but, striding across the room, I held out my hand over the table to Châtellerault. "My dear Comte," I cried, "you are most choicely met." I would have added more, but there was something in his attitude that silenced me. He had turned half from me, and stood now, hand on hip, his great head thrown back and tilted toward his shoulder, his expression one of freezing and disdainful wonder. Now, if his attitude filled me with astonishment and apprehension, consider how these feelings were heightened by his words. "Monsieur de l'Esperron, I can but express amazement at your effrontery. If we had been acquainted in the past, do you think that is a sufficient reason for me to take your hand now that you have placed yourself in a position which renders it impossible for His Majesty's loyal servants to know you?" I fell back a pace, my mind scarce grasping yet the depths of this inexplicable attitude. "This to me, Châtellerault?" I gasped. "To you?" he blazed, stirred to sudden passion. "What else did you expect, Monsieur de l'Esperron?" I had it in me to give him a lie, to denounce him then for a low, swindling trickster. I understood all at once the meaning of this wondrous make-believe. From St. Eustache he had gathered the mistake there was, and for his wager's sake, he would let the error prevail and hurry me to the scaffold. What else might I have expected from the man that had lured me into such a wager which the knowledge he possessed had made him certain of winning? Would he who had cheated at the dealing of the cards neglect an opportunity to cheat again during the progress of the game? As I have said, I had in my mind to cry out that he lied, that I was not l'Esperron, that he knew I was Bardelys. But the futility of such an outcry came to me simultaneously with the thought of it, and, I fear me, I stood before him and his satellites, the mocking St. Eustache amongst them, a very foolish figure. "There is no more to be said," I murmured at last. "But there is," he retorted. "There is much more to be said. You shall render yet an account of your treason, and I am afraid, my poor rebel, that your comely head will part company with your shapely body. You and I will meet at Toulouse. What more is to be said will be said in the tribunal there. A chill encompassed me. I was doomed, it seemed. This man, ruling the province pending the king's arrival, would see to it that none came forward to recognize me. He would expedite the comedy of my trial and close it with the tragedy of my execution. My professions of mistake of identity, if I wasted breath upon them, would be treated with disdain and disregarded utterly. God, what a position had I got myself into, and what a vein of comedy ran through it. Grim, tragic comedy, if you will, yet comedy to all faith. The very woman whom I had wagered to wed had betrayed me into the hands of the very man with whom I laid my wager. But there was more in it than that. As I had told Myronsack that night in Paris, when the thing had been initiated, it was a duel that was being fought betwixt Châtellerault and me, a duel for supremacy in the king's good graces. We were rivals, and he desired my removal from the court. To this end had he lured me into a bargain that should result in my financial ruin, thereby compelling me to withdraw from the costly life of the Luxembourg, and leaving him supreme, the sole and uncontested recipient of our master's favor. Now into his hand fate had thrust a stouter weapon and a deadlier, a weapon which not only should make him master of the wealth that I had pledged, but one whereby he might remove me for all time, 1,000-fold more effectively than the mere encompassing of my ruin would have done. I was doomed. I realized it fully and very bitterly. I was to go all the ways of men unnoticed and unmourned. As a rebel, under the obscure name of another and bearing another's sins upon my shoulders, I was to pass almost unheeded to the gallows. Bardelys the Magnificent, the Marquis Marcel St. Pol de Bardelys, whose splendor had been a byword in France, was to go out like a guttering candle. The thought filled me with the awful frenzy that so often goes with impotency, such a frenzy as the damned in hell may know. I forgot in that hour my precept that under no conditions should a gentleman give way to anger. In a blind access of fury, I flung myself across the table and caught that villainous cheat by the throat. Before any there could put out a hand to stop me, he was a heavy man, if a short one, and the strength of his thick-set frame was a thing abnormal. Yet at that moment such nervous power did I gather from my rage, that I swung him from his feet as though he had been the puниest weakling. I dragged him down onto the table, and there I ground his face with most excellent goodwill and relish. "You liar, you cheat, you thief!" I snarled like any cross-grained mongrel. "The king shall hear this, you knave! By God, he shall!" They dragged me from him at last, those lapdogs that attended him, and with much rough handling, they sent me sprawling among the sawdust on the floor. It is more than likely that but for Castellix's intervention, they had made short work of me there and then. But with a bunch of more jurors, Sanguius and captive Jews, the little Gascon flung himself before my prostrate figure and bade them in the king's name and at their peril to stand back. Châtellerault, sorely shaken, his face purple, and with blood streaming from his nostrils, had sunk into a chair. He rose now, and his first words were incoherent, raging gasps. "What is your name, sir?" he bellowed at last, addressing the captain. "Amadis de Marensac de Castelrix, of Château Rouge in Gascony," answered my captor, with a grand man and a flourish, and added, "Your servant. What authority have you to allow your prisoners this degree of freedom?" "I do not need authority, monsieur," replied the Gascon. "Do you not?" blazed the Count. "We shall see. Wait until I am in Toulouse, my malapert friend." Castelrix drew himself up, straight as a rapier, his face slightly flushed and his glance angry, yet he had the presence of mind to restrain himself, partly at least. "I have my orders from the Keeper of the Seals to effect the apprehension of Monsieur de L'Esperron, and to deliver him up, alive or dead, at Toulouse. So that I do this, the manner of it is my own affair, and who presumes to criticize my methods censoriously impugns my honor and affronts me. And who affronts me, monsieur, be he whosoever he may be, renders me satisfaction. I beg that you will bear that circumstance in mind." His mustaches bristled as he spoke, and altogether his air was very fierce and truculent. For a moment I trembled for him, but the Count evidently thought better of it than to provoke a quarrel, particularly one in which he would be manifestly in the wrong, King's commissioner though he might be. There was an exchange of questionable compliments betwixt the officer and the Count, whereafter, to avoid further unpleasantness, Castelrix conducted me to a private room, where we took our meal in gloomy silence. It was not until an hour later, when we were again in the saddle, and upon the last stage of our journey, that I offered Casterix an explanation of my seemingly mad attack upon Châtellerault. "You have done a very rash and unwise thing, monsieur," he had commented regretfully, and it was in answer to this that I poured out the whole story. I had determined upon this course while we were supping, for Casterix was now my only hope, and as we rode beneath the stars of that September night, I made known to him my true identity. I told him that Châtellerault knew me, and I informed him that a wager lay between us, withholding particulars of his nature, which had brought me into Languedoc and into the position wherein he had found and arrested me. At first he hesitated to believe me, but when at last I convinced him by the vehemence of my assurances, as much as by the assurances themselves, he expressed such opinions of the Comte de Châtellerault as made my heart go out to him. "You see, my dear Casterix, that you are now my last hope," I said. "A forlorn one, my poor gentleman," he groaned. "Nay, that need not be. My intendant Rodnard and some 20 of my servants should be somewhere betwixt this and Paris. Let them be sought for, monsieur, and let us pray God that they be still in Languedoc and may be found in time." "It shall be done, monsieur, I promise you," he answered me solemnly. "But I implore you not to hope too much from it. Châtellerault has it in his power to act promptly, and you may depend that he will waste no time after what is past. Still, we may have 2 or 3 days, and in those days you must do what you can, my friend." "You may depend upon me," he promised. "And meanwhile, Casterix," said I, "you will say no word of this to anyone." That assurance also he gave me, and presently the lights of our destination gleamed out to greet us. That night I lay in a dank and gloomy cell of the prison of Toulouse, with never a hope to bear company during those dark, wakeful hours. A dull rage was in my soul as I thought of my position, for I had not needed Casterix's recommendation to restrain me from building false hopes upon his chances of finding Rodnard and my followers in time to save me. Some little ray of consolation I culled, perhaps, from my thoughts of Roxelane. Out of the gloom of my cell my fancy fashioned her sweet girl face and stamped it with a look of gentle pity, of infinite sorrow for me and for the hand she had had in bringing me to this. That she loved me I was assured, and I swore that if I lived I would win her yet, in spite of every obstacle that I myself had raised for my undoing. Chapter 12. The Tribunal of Toulouse. I had hoped to lie some days in prison before being brought to trial, and that during those days Casterix might have succeeded in discovering those who could witness to my identity. Conceive, therefore, something of my dismay when on the morrow I was summoned an hour before noon to go present myself to my judges. From the prison to the palace I was taken in chains like any thief, for the law demanded this indignity, to be borne by one charge of the crimes they imputed to me. The distance was but short, yet I found overlong, which is not wonderful considering that the people stopped to line up as I went by and to cast upon me a shower of opprobrious derision, for Toulouse was a very faithful and loyal city. It was within some 200 yards of the palace steps that I suddenly beheld a face in the crowd, at the sight of which I stood still in my amazement. This earned me a stab in the back from the butt end of the pike of one of my guards. "What ails you now?" quoth the man irritably. "Forward, Monsieur le Trait." I moved on, scarce remarking the fellow's roughness. My eyes were still upon that face, the white, piteous face of Roxelane. I smiled reassurance and encouragement, but even as I smiled, the horror in her countenance seemed to increase. Then, as I passed on, she vanished from my sight, and I was left to conjecture the motives that had occasioned her return to Toulouse. Had the message that Marsac would yesterday have conveyed to her caused her to retrace her steps that she might be near me in my extremity, or had some weightier reason influenced her return? Did she hope to undo some of the evil she had done? Alas, poor child! If such were her hopes, I sorely fear me they would prove very idle. Of my trial, I should say, but little did not the exigencies of my story render it necessary to say much. Even now, across the gap of years, my gorge rises at the mockery which, in the king's name, those gentlemen made of justice. I can allow for the troubled conditions of the times, and I can realize how in cases of civil disturbances and rebellion it may be expedient to deal summarily with traitors, yet not all the allowances that I can think of would suffice to condone the methods of that tribunal. The trial was conducted in private by the keeper of the seals, a lean, wizened individual, with an air as musty and dry as that of the parchments among which he had spent his days. He was supported by 6 judges, and on his right sat the king's commissioner, Monsieur de Châtellerault, the bruised condition of whose countenance still advertised the fact that we had met but yesterday. Upon being asked my name and place of abode, I created some commotion by answering boldly, "I am the Sieur Marcel de Saint Pol, Marquis of Bardelys in Picardy." The president, that is to say, the keeper of the seals, turned inquiringly to Châtellerault. The count, however, did no more than smile and point to something written on a paper that lay spread upon the table. The president nodded. "Monsieur Renaud de Bardelys," said he, "the court may perhaps not be able to discriminate whether this statement of yours is a deliberate attempt to misguide or frustrate the ends of justice, or whether, either in consequence of your wounds or as a visitation of God for your treason, you are the victim of a deplorable hallucination. But the court wishes you to understand that it is satisfied of your identity. The papers found upon your person at the time of your arrest, besides other evidence in our power, remove all possibility of doubt in that connection. Therefore, in your own interests, we implore you to abandon these false statements. If so, be that you are master of your wits. Your only hope of saving your head must lie in your truthfully answering our questions. And even then, Monsieur de Bardelys, the hope that we hold out to you is so slight as to be no hope at all." There was a pause, during which the other judges nodded their heads in sage approval of the president's words. For myself, I kept silent, perceiving how little it could avail me to continue protest, and awaited his next question. "You were arrested, monsieur, at the Château de Lavardin 2 nights ago by a company of dragoons under the command of Captain de Castelrix. Is that so?" "It is so, monsieur. And at the time of your arrest, upon being apprehended as Renaud de Bardelys, you offered no repudiation of the identity. On the contrary, when Monsieur de Castelrix called for Monsieur de Bardelys, you stepped forward and acknowledged that you were he." "Pardon, monsieur. What I acknowledged was that I was known by that name." The president chuckled evilly, and his satellite smiled in polite reflection of his mood. "This acute differentiating is peculiar, Monsieur de Bardelys, to persons of unsound mental condition," said he. "I am afraid that it will serve little purpose. A man is generally known by his name, is he not?" I did not answer him. "Shall we call Monsieur de Castelrix to confirm what I have said?" "It is not necessary, since you allow that I may have said I was known by the name, but refuse to recognize the distinction between that and a statement that Bardelys is my name. It would serve no purpose to summon the captain." The president nodded, and with that the point was dismissed, and he proceeded as calmly as though there never had been any question of my identity. "You are charged, Monsieur de Bardelys, with high treason in its most virulent and malignant form. You are accused of having borne arms against His Majesty. Have you anything to say?" "I have to say that it is false, monsieur, that His Majesty has no more faithful or loving subject than am I." The president shrugged his shoulders, and a shade of annoyance crossed his face. "If you are come here for no other purpose than to deny the statements that I make, I am afraid that we are but wasting time," he cried testily. "If you desire it, I can summon Monsieur de Castelrix to swear that at the time of your arrest, and upon being charged with the crime, you made no repudiation of that charge." "Naturally not, monsieur," I cried, somewhat heated by this seemingly studied ignoring of important facts, "because I realized that it was Monsieur de Castelrix's mission to arrest and not to judge me. Monsieur de Castelrix was an officer, not a tribunal, and to have denied this or that to him would have been so much waste of breath." "Ah, very nimble in truth, Monsieur de Bardelys, but scarcely convincing. We will proceed. You are charged with having taken part in several of the skirmishes against the armies of Marshals de Schomberg and La Force, and finally, with having been in close attendance upon Monsieur de Montmorency at the Battle of Castelnaudary. What have you to say?" "That is utterly untrue. Yet your name, monsieur, is on a list found among the papers in the captured baggage of Monsieur le Duc de Montmorency." "No, monsieur, I deny it stoutly. It is not." The president smote the table a blow that scattered a flight of papers. "Par la mort Dieu," he roared, with a most indecent exhibition of temper in one so placed. "I have had enough of your contradictions. You forget, monsieur, your position. At least," I broke in harshly, "no less than you forget yours." The keeper of the seals gasped for breath at that, and his fellow judges murmured angrily amongst themselves. Châtellerault maintained his sardonic smile, but permitted himself to utter no word. "I would, gentlemen," I cried, addressing them all, "that His Majesty were here to see how you conduct your trials and defile his courts. As for you, Monsieur le President, you violate the sanctity of your office in giving way to anger. It is a thing unpardonable in a judge. I have told you in plain terms, gentlemen, that I am not this Renaud de Bardelys with whose crimes you charge me. Yet, in spite of my denials, ignoring them or setting them down either to a futile attempt at defense or to an hallucination of which you suppose me the victim, you proceed to lay those crimes to my charge, and when I deny your charges you speak of proofs that can only apply to another. How shall the name of Lesperon, having been found among the Duke of Montmorency's papers, convict me of treason, since I tell you that I am not Lesperon? Had you the slightest, the remotest sense of your high duty, messers, you would ask me rather to explain how, if what I state be true, I come be confounded with Lesperon and arrested in his place. Then, messers, you might seek to test the accuracy of what statements I may make. But to proceed as you are proceeding is not to judge, but to murder. Justice is represented as a virtuous woman with bandaged eyes, holding impartial scales. In your hands, gentlemen, by my soul, she has become a very harlot clutching a veil." Châtellerault's cynical smile grew broader as my speech proceeded and stirred up the rancor in the hearts of those august gentlemen. The keeper of the seals went white and red by turns, and when I paused there was an impressive silence that lasted for some moments. At last the president leaned over to confer in a whisper with Châtellerault. Then, in a voice forcefully calm, like the calm of nature when thunder is brewing, he asked me, "Who do you insist that you are, monsieur? Once already have I told you, and I venture to think that mine is a name not easily forgotten. I am the Sieur Marcel de Saint-Pol, Marquis of Bardelys in Picardy." A cunning grin parted his thin lips. "Have you any witnesses to identify you?" "Hundreds, monsieur," I answered eagerly, seeing salvation already within my grasp. "Name some of them." "I will name one whose word you will not dare to doubt. That is His Majesty the King. I am told that he is on his way to Toulouse, and I but ask, messers, that you await his arrival before going further with my trial. Is there no other witness of whom you can think, monsieur? Some witness that might be produced more readily? For if you can, indeed, establish the identity you claim, why should you languish in prison for some weeks?" His voice was soft and oily. The anger had all departed out of it, which I, like a fool, imagined to be due to my mention of the king. "My friends, Monsieur le Garde des Sceaux, are all either in Paris or in His Majesty's train, and so not likely to be here before him. There is my intendant, Rodnard, and there are my servants, some 20 of them, who may perhaps be still in Languedoc, and for whom I would entreat you to seek. Them you might succeed in finding within a few days if they have not yet determined to return to Paris in the belief that I am dead." He stroked his chin meditatively, his eyes raised to the sunlit dome of glass overhead. "Ah-H," he gasped. It was a long-drawn sigh of regret, of conclusion, or of weary impatience. "There is no one in Toulouse who will swear to your identity, monsieur?" he asked. "I am afraid there is not," I replied. "I know of no one." As I uttered those words, the president's countenance changed as abruptly as if he had flung off a mask. From soft and cat-like that he had been during the past few moments, he grew of a sudden savage as a tiger. He leapt to his feet, his face crimson, his eyes seeming to blaze, and the words he spoke came now in a hot, confused, and almost incoherent torrent. "Miserable," he roared. "Out of your own mouth have you convicted yourself. And to think that you should have stood there and wasted the time of this court, His Majesty's time, with your damnable falsehoods. What purpose did you think to serve by delaying your doom? Did you imagine that haply, whilst we sent to Paris for your witnesses, the king might grow weary of justice, and in some fit of clemency announce a general pardon? Such things have been known, and it may be that in your cunning you played for such a gain based upon such a hope. But justice, fool, is not to be cozened. Had you, indeed, been Bardelys, you had seen that here in this court sat a gentleman who is very intimate with him. He is there, monsieur. That is Monsieur le Comte de Châtellerault, of whom perhaps you may have heard. Yet, When I ask you whether in Toulouse there is anyone who can bear witness to your identity, you answer me that you know of no one. I will waste no more time with you. I promise you. He flung himself back into his chair like a man exhausted, and mopped his brow with a great kerchief which he had drawn from his robes. His fellow judges laid their heads together, and with smiles and nods, winks and leers, they discussed and admired the miraculous subtlety and acumen of the Solomon. Châtellerault sat, calmly smiling, in solemn mockery. For a spell I was too thunderstruck to speak, aghast at this catastrophe. Like a fool, indeed, I had tumbled into the pit that had been dug for me by Châtellerault, for I never doubted that it was of his contriving. At last, "My masters," said I, "these conclusions may appear to you most plausible, but believe me, they are fallacious. I am perfectly acquainted with Monsieur de Châtellerault, and he with me, and if he were to speak the truth and play the man and the gentleman for once, he would tell you that I am, indeed, Bardelys. But Monsieur le Comte has ends of his own to serve in sending me to my doom. It is in a sense through his agency that I am at present in this position, and that I have been confounded with L'Esperone. What, then, could have availed me to have made appeal to him? And yet, Monsieur le President, he was born a gentleman, and he may still retain some notion of honor. Ask him, sir, ask him point blank, whether I am or not Marcel de Bardelys." The firmness of my tones created some impression upon those feeble minds. Indeed, the president went so far as to turn an interrogative glance upon the count. But Châtellerault, supremely master of the situation, shrugged his shoulders and smiled a pitying, long-suffering smile. "Must I really answer such a question, Monsieur le President?" he inquired in a voice and with a manner that clearly implied how low would be his estimate of the president's intelligence if he were, indeed, constrained to do so. "But no, Monsieur le Comte," replied the president with sudden haste and in scornful rejection of the idea. "There is no necessity that you should answer. But the question, Monsieur le President," I thundered, my hand outstretched toward Châtellerault. "Ask him, if you have any sense of your duty. Ask him, am I not Marcel de Bardelys?" "Silence!" blazed the president back at me. "You shall not fool us any longer, you nimble-witted liar." My head drooped. This coward had, indeed, shattered my last hope. "Some day, monsieur," I said very quietly, "I promise you that your behavior and these gratuitous insults shall cost you your position. Pray God, they do not cost you also your head." My words they treated as one might treat the threats of a child. That I should have had the temerity to utter them did but serve finally to decide my doom, if, indeed, anything had been wanting. With many epithets of opprobrium, such as are applied to malefactors of the lowest degree, they passed sentence of death upon me, and with drooping spirits, giving myself up for lost and assured that I should be led to block before many hours were sped, I permitted them to reconduct me through the streets of Toulouse to my prison. I could entertain you at length upon my sensations as I walked between my guards, a man on the threshold of eternity, with hundreds of men and women gaping at me, men and women who would live for years to gape upon many another wretch in my position. The sun shone with a brilliance that to such eyes as mine was a very mockery. Thus would it shine on through centuries, and light many another unfortunate to the scaffold. The very sky seemed pitiless in the intensity of its cobalt. Unfeeling, I deemed the note that everywhere was struck by man and nature. So discordant was it with my gloomy outlook. If you would have food for reflection upon the evanescent quality of life, upon the nothingness of man, upon the empty, heartless egoism implicit in human nature, get yourself sentenced to death, and then look around you. With such a force was all this borne in upon me, and with such sufficiency, that after first pang was spent I went near to rejoicing that things were as they were, and that I was to die, haply before sunset. It was become such a world as did not seem worth a man's while to live in, a world of vainness, of hollowness, of meanness, of nothing but illusions. The knowledge that I was about to die, that I was about to quit all this, seemed to have torn some veil from my eyes, and have permitted me to recognize the worthless quality of what I left. Well may it be that such are but the thoughts of a man's dying moments, whispered into his soul by a merciful God to predispose him for the wrench and agony of his passing. I had been a half-hour in my cell, when the door was opened to admit Castelrix, whom I had not seen since the night before. He came to condole with me in my extremity, and yet to bid me not utterly lose hope. "It is too late today to carry out the sentence," said he, "and as tomorrow will be Sunday, you will have until the day after. By then much may betide, monsieur. My agents are everywhere scouring the province for your servants, and let us pray heaven that they may succeed in their search." "It is a forlorn hope, Monsieur de Castelrix," I sighed, "and I will pin no faith to it lest I suffer a disappointment that will embitter my last moments, and perhaps rob me of some of the fortitude I shall have need of." He answered me, nevertheless, with words of encouragement. No effort was being spared, and if Rodnard and my men were still in Languedoc, then was every likelihood that they would be brought to Toulouse in time. Then he added that, however, was not the sole object of his visit. A lady had obtained permission of the Keeper of the Seals to visit me, and she was waiting to be admitted. "A lady?" I exclaimed, and the thought of Roxelane flitted through my mind. "Mademoiselle de Lavedon?" I inquired. He nodded. "Yes," said he, then added, "She seems in sore affliction, monsieur." I besought him to admit her forthwith, and presently she came. Castelrix closed the door as he withdrew, and we were left alone together. As she put aside her cloak, and disclosed to me the pallor of her face and the disfiguring red about her gentle eyes, telling of tears and sleeplessness, all my own troubles seemed to vanish in the contemplation of her affliction. We stood a moment confronting each other with no word spoken. Then, dropping her glance and advancing a step, in a faltering, hesitating manner, monsieur, she murmured in a suffocating voice. In a bound I was beside her, and I had gathered her in my arms, her little brown head against my shoulder. "Roxelane," I whispered as soothingly as I might, "Roxelane," but she struggled to be free of my embrace. "Let me go, monsieur," she pleaded, a curious shrinking in her very voice. "Do not touch me, monsieur. You do not know. For answer, I enfolded her more tightly still. "But I do know, little one," I whispered, "and I even understand." At that, her struggles ceased upon the instant, and she seemed to lie limp and helpless in my arms. "You know, monsieur," she questioned me, "you know that I betrayed you?" "Yes," I answered simply. "And you can forgive me? I am sending you to your death, and you have no reproaches for me. Oh, monsieur, it will kill me." "Hush, child," I whispered. "What reproaches can I have for you? I know the motives that impelled you." "Not altogether, monsieur. You cannot know them. I love you, monsieur. I do love you, monsieur. Oh, this is not a time to consider words. If I am bold and unmaidenly, I, neither bold nor unmaidenly, but, oh, the sweetest damsel in all France, my Roxelane." I broke in, coming to her aid. Mine was a leprous, sinful soul, child, when I came into Languedoc. I had no faith in any human good, and I looked as little for an honest man or a virtuous woman as one looks for honey in a nettle. I was soured, and my life had hardly been such a life as it was meet to bring into contact with your own. Then, among the roses at Lavedon, in your dear company, Roxelane, it seemed that some of the good, some of the sweetness, some of the purity about you were infused anew into my heart. I became young again, and I seemed oddly cleansed. In that hour of my rejuvenation, I loved you, Roxelane. Her face had been raised to mine as I spoke. There came now a flutter of the eyelids, a curious smile about the lips. Then her head drooped again and was laid against my breast. A sigh escaped her, and she began to weep softly. "Nay, Roxelane, do not fret. Come, child, it is not your way to be weak." "I have betrayed you," she moaned. "I am sending you to your death." I understand, I answered, smoothing her brown hair. "Not quite, monsieur. I loved you so, monsieur, that you can have no thought of how I suffered that morning when Mademoiselle de Marsac came to Lavedon. At first it was but the pain of thinking that I was about to lose you, that you would go out of my life, and that I should see you no more, you whom I had enshrined so in my heart. I called myself a little fool that morning for having dreamed that you had come to care for me. My vanity, I thought, had deluded me into imagining that your manner towards me had a tenderness that spoke of affection. I was bitter with myself, and I suffered, oh, so much. Then later, when I was in the rose garden, you came to me. You remember how you seized me, and how by your manner you showed me that it was not vanity alone had misled me. You had fooled me. I thought, Even in that hour, I imagined you were fooling me. You made light of me, and my sufferings were naught to you, so that I might give you some amusement to pass the leisure and monotony of your sojourn with us. Roxalyn, my poor Roxalyn, I whispered. Then my bitterness and sorrow all turned to anger against you. You had broken my heart, and I thought that you had done it wantonly. For that I burned to punish you. Ah, and not only that, perhaps, I think, too, that some jealousy drove me on. You had wooed and slighted me, yet you had made me love you, and if you were not for me, I swore you should be for no other. And so, while my madness endured, I quitted Laverton, and telling my father that I was going out, to his sister's house, I came to Toulouse and betrayed you to the keeper of the seals. Scarce was the thing done than I beheld the horror of it, and I hated myself. In my despair, I abandoned all idea of pursuing the journey to Alc, but turned and made my way back in haste, hoping that I might still come to warn you. But at Grenade, I met you already in charge of the soldiers. At Grenade, too, I learned the truth, that you were not Lesperon. Can you not guess something of my anguish then? Already loathing my act, and beside myself for having betrayed you, think into what despair I was plunged by Monsieur de Marsac's intimation. Then I understood that for reasons of your own you had concealed your identity. You were not perhaps betrothed. Indeed, I remembered then how solemnly you had sworn that you were not. And so I bethought me that your vows to me may have been sincere, and such as a maid might honorably listen to. They were, Roxalyn, they were. I cried, but she continued that you had Mademoiselle de Marsac's portrait was something that I could not explain. But then I hear that you had also Lesperance papers upon you, so that you may have become possessed of the one with the others. And now, monsieur, she ceased, and there against my breast she lay weeping and weeping in her bitter passion of regret, until it seemed to me she would never regain her self-control. It has been all my fault, Roxalyn, said I, and if I am to pay the price they are exacting, it will be none too high. I embarked upon a dastardly business, which brought me to Languedoc under false colors. I wish, indeed, that I had told you when first the impulse to tell you came upon me. Afterwards it grew impossible. Tell me now, she begged. Tell me who you are. Sorely was I tempted to respond, almost was I on the point of doing so, when suddenly the thought how she might shrink from me, of how, even then, she might come to think that I had but simulated love for her for infamous purposes of gain, restrained and silenced me. During the few hours of life that might be left me, I would at least be lord and master of her heart. When I was dead, for I had little hope of Castorix's efforts, it would matter less, and perhaps because I was dead she would be merciful. I cannot, Roxalyn, not even now. It is too vile. If they carry out the sentence on Monday, I shall leave a letter for you, telling you everything. She shuddered and a sob escaped her. From my identity, her mind fled back to more important matter of my fate. They will not carry it out, monsieur. Oh, they will not. Say that you can defend yourself, that you are not the man they believe you to be. We are in God's hands, child. It may be that I shall save myself yet. If I do, I shall come straight to you, and you shall know all that there is to know. But remember, child, and raising her face in my hands, I looked down into the blue of her tearful eyes. Remember, little one, that in one thing I have been true and honorable and influenced by nothing but my heart, in my wooing of you. I love you, Roxalyn, with all my soul, and if I should die, you're the only thing in all this world that I experience or regret at leaving. I do believe it. I do, indeed. Nothing can ever alter my belief again. Will you not? Then tell me who you are, and what is this thing, which you call dishonorable, that brought you into Languedoc? A moment again I pondered. Then I shook my head. Wait, child, said I, and she, obedient to my wishes, asked no more. It was the second time that I neglected a favorable opportunity of making that confession, and as I regretted having allowed the first occasion to pass unprofited, so was I, and still more poignantly, to regret this second silence. A little while she stayed with me yet, and I sought to instill some measure of comfort into her soul. I spoke of the hopes that I based upon Castorix's finding friends to recognize me, hopes that were passing slender, and she, poor child, sought also to cheer me and give me courage. If only the king were here, she sighed, I would go to him, and on my knees I would plead for your enlargement. But they say he is no nearer than lions, and I could not hope to get there and back by Monday. I will go to the Keeper of the Seals again, monsieur, and I will beg him to be merciful, and at least to delay the sentence." I did not discourage her. I did not speak of the futility of such a step, but I begged her to remain in Toulouse until Monday, that she might visit me again before the end. If the end were to become inevitable, then Casterix came to reconduct her, and we parted. But she left me a great consolation, a great strengthening comfort. If I were destined, indeed, to walk to the scaffold, it seemed that I could do it with a better grace and a gladder courage now. Chapter 13. The 11th hour. Casterix visited me upon the following morning, but he brought no news that might be accounted encouraging. None of his messengers were yet returned, nor had any sent word that they were upon the trail of my followers. My heart sank a little, and such hope as I still fostered was fast perishing. Indeed, so imminent did my doom appear and so unavoidable, that later in the day I asked for pen and paper that I might make an attempt at setting my earthly affairs to rights. Yet when the writing materials were brought me, I wrote not. I sat instead with the feathered end of my quill between my teeth, and thus pondered the matter of the disposal of my Picardy estates. Coldly I weighed the wording of the wager and the events that had transpired, and I came at length to the conclusion that Châtellerault could not be held to have the least claim upon my lands. That he had cheated at the very outset, as I have earlier shown, was of less account than that he had been instrumental in violently hindering me. I took at last a resolve to indite a full memoir of the transaction, and to request Casterix to see that it was delivered to the king himself. Thus not only would justice be done, but I should, though tardily, be even with the count. No doubt he relied upon his power to make a thorough search for such papers as I might leave, and to destroy everything that might afford indication of my true identity. But he had not counted upon the good feeling that had sprung up betwixt the little Gascon captain and me, nor yet upon my having contrived to convince the latter that I was, indeed, Bardelys, and he little dreamed of such a step as I was about to take to ensure his punishment hereafter. Resolved at last, I was commencing to write when my attention was arrested by an unusual sound. It was at first no more than a murmuring noise, as of a sea breaking upon its shore. Gradually it grew its volume, and assumed the shape of human voices raised in lusty clamor. Then, above the din of the populace, a gun boomed out, then another and another. I sprang up at that, and, wondering what might be toward, I crossed my bar window and stood there listening. I overlooked the courtyard of the jail, and I could see some commotion below, in sympathy, as it were, with the greater commotion without. Presently, as the populace drew nearer, it seemed to me that the shouting was of acclamation. Next I caught a blare of trumpets. And lastly, I was able to distinguish above the noise, which had now grown to monstrous proportions, the clattering hoofs of some cavalcade that was riding past the prison doors. It was borne upon me that some great personage was arriving in Toulouse, and my first thought was of the king. At the idea of such a possibility, my brain whirled, and I grew dizzy with hope. The next moment I recalled that but last night Roxelin had told me that he was no nearer than lions, and so I put the thought from me, and the hope with it, for, traveling in that leisurely, indolent fashion that was characteristic of his every action, it would be a miracle if His Majesty should reach Toulouse before the week was out, and this but Sunday. The populace passed on, then seemed to halt, and at last the shouts died down on the noontide air. I went back to my writing, and to wait until from my jailer, when next he should chance to appear, I might learn the meaning of that uproar. An hour perhaps went by, and I had made some progress with my memoir, when my door was opened and the cheery voice of Casterix greeted me from the threshold. "Monsieur, I have brought a friend to see you." I turned in my chair, and one glance at the gentle, comely face and the fair hair of the young man standing beside Casterix was enough to bring me of a sudden to my feet. "Myronsac," I shouted, and sprang towards him with hands outstretched. But though my joy was great and my surprise profound, greater still was the bewilderment that in Myronsac's face I saw depicted. "Monsieur de Bardelys!" he exclaimed, and 100 questions were contained in his astonished eyes. "Pecap de Dieu!" growled his cousin. "I was well advised, it seems, to have brought you, but—" Myronsac asked his cousin, as he took my hands in his own, "Why did you not tell me, Amédée, that it was to Monsieur le Marquis de Bardelys that you were conducting me?" Would you have had me spoil so pleasant surprise? His cousin demanded. Armand, said I, never was a man more welcome than are you. You are but come in time to save my life. And then, in answer to his questions, I told him briefly of all that had befallen me since that night in Paris when the wager had been laid, and of how, through the cunning silence of Châtellerault, I was now upon the very threshold of the scaffold. His wrath burst forth at that, and what he said of the Count did me good to hear. At last I stemmed his invective. Let that be for the present, Myronsack. I laughed. You are here, and you can thwart all Châtellerault's designs by witnessing to my identity before the keeper of the seals. And then of a sudden a doubt closed like a cold hand upon my brain. I turned to Castelrix. Deny it you, he laughed. They will not be asked to grant you one. There will be no need, added Myronsack. I have but to tell the king. But, my friend, I exclaimed impatiently, I am to die in the morning, and the king shall be told today, now at once. I will go to him. I stared askance a moment. Then the thought of the uproar that I had heard recurring to me, has the king arrived already? I exclaimed, naturally, monsieur. How else do I come to be here? I am in his majesty's train. At that I grew again impatient. I thought of Roxelane and of how she must be suffering, and I bethought me that every moment Myronsack now remained in my cell was another moment of torture for that poor child. So I urged him to be gone at once, and carry news of my confinement to his majesty. He obeyed me, and I was left alone once more, to pace up and down in my narrow cell, a prey to an excitement such as I should have thought I had outlived. At the end of a half-hour, Castelrix returned alone. Well, I cried the moment the door opened, and without giving him so much as time to enter. What news? Myronsack tells me that his majesty is more overwrought than he has ever seen him. You are to come to the palace at once. I have an order here from the king. We went in a coach and with all privacy, for he informed me that his majesty desired the affair to be kept secret, having ends of his own to serve thereby. I was left to wait some moments in an antechamber, whilst Castelrix announced me to the king. Then I was ushered into a small apartment, furnished very sumptuously in crimson and gold, and evidently set apart for his majesty's studies or devotions. As I entered, Louis's back was towards me. He was standing, a tall, spare figure in black, leaning against the frame of a window, his head supported on his raised left arm, and his eyes intent upon the gardens below. He remained so until Castelrix had withdrawn and the door had closed again. Then, turning suddenly, he confronted me, his back to the light, so that his face was in shadow that heightened its gloom and wonted weariness. Voila, Monsieur de Bardelys, was his greeting, and unfriendly. See the pass to which your disobedience of my commands has brought you. I would submit, sire, I answered, that I have been brought to it by the incompetence of your majesty's judges and the ill will of others whom your majesty honors with too great a confidence, rather than by the same disobedience of mine. The one and the other, perhaps, he said more softly, though, after all, they appear to have had a very keen nose for a traitor. Come, Bardelys, confess yourself that. I, a traitor? He shrugged his shoulders and laughed without any conspicuous mirth. Is not a traitor one who runs counter to the wishes of his king? And are you not, therefore, a traitor, whether they call you L'Esperon or Bardelys? But there, he ended more softly still, and flinging himself into a chair as he spoke, I have been so wearied since you left me, Marcel. They have the best intentions in the world, these dullards, and some of them love me even. But they are tiresome all, even Châtellerault, when he has a fancy for a jest, as in your case perpetrates it with the grace of a bear, the sprightliness of an elephant. Jest, said I. You find it no jest, Marcel. Pardieu, who shall blame you? He would be a man of unhealthy humor that could relish such a pleasantry as that of being sentenced to death. But tell me of it, the whole story, Marcel. I have not heard a story worth the listening to since you left us. Would it please you, sire, to send for the Comte de Châtellerault ere I begin? I asked. Châtellerault? No, no. He shook his head whimsically. Châtellerault has had his laugh already, and, like the ill-mannered dog he has kept it to himself. I think, Marcel, that it is our turn now. I have purposely sent Châtellerault away that he may gain no notion of the catastrophic jest we are preparing him in return. The words set me in the very best of humors, and to that it may be due that presently, as I warmed to my narrative, I lent it a vigor that drew His Majesty out of his wonted apathy and listlessness. He leaned forward when I told him of my encounter with the dragoons at Mirepoix, and how first I had committed the false step of representing myself to be L'Esperone. Encouraged by his interest, I proceeded, and I told my story with as much piquancy as I was master of, repressing only those slight matters which might reflect upon Monsieur de Laverden's loyalty, but otherwise dealing frankly with His Majesty, even down to the genuineness of the feelings I entertained for Roxelane. Often he laughed. More often still he nodded approvingly, in understanding and sympathy, whilst now and then he purred his applause. But towards the end, when I came to matter the tribunal of Toulouse, of how my trial was conducted, and the part played in it by Châtellerault, his face grew set and hard. "It is true, all this that you tell me," he cried harshly, "as true as the Gospels. If you deem an oath necessary, sire, I swear by my honor that I have uttered nothing that is false, and that, in connection with Monsieur de Châtellerault, even as I have suppressed nothing, so also have I exaggerated nothing." "The dastard!" he snapped. "But we will avenge you, Marcel. Never fear it." Then, the trend of his thoughts being changed, he smiled wearily. "By my faith, you may thank God every night of your worthless life that I came so opportunely to Toulouse, and so may that fair child whose beauty you have limned with such a lover's ardor." "Nay, never redden, Marcel. What? At your age, and with such a heavy score of affairs to your credit, has it been left for a simple Languedoc maiden to call a blush to your callous cheek? My foi, they say truly that love is a great regenerator, a great rejuvenator." I made him no answer other than a sigh, for his words set me thinking, and with thought came a tempering of the gay humor that had pervaded me. Remarking this, and misreading it, he laughed outright. "There, Marcel, never fear. We will not be rigorous. You have won both the maid and the wager, and by the mass, you shall enjoy both. Hellas, sire, I sighed again, when the lady comes to know the wager. Waste no time in telling her, Marcel, and cast yourself upon her mercy. Nay, go not with so gloomy a face, my friend. When woman loves, she can be very merciful. Leastways, they tell me so." Then, his thoughts shifting ground once more, he grew stern again. "But first we have Châtellerault to deal with. What shall we do with him? It is for your Majesty to decide." "For me?" he cried, his voice resuming the harshness that was never far from it. "I have a fancy for having gentlemen about me. Think you I will set eyes again upon that dastard? I am already resolved concerning him. But enter my mind that it might please you to be the instrument of the law for me. Me, sire? Aye, and why not? They say you can play a very deadly sword upon necessity. This is an occasion that demands an exception from our edict. You have my sanction to send the Comte de Châtellerault a challenge. And see that you kill him, Bardelys," he continued viciously. "For, by the mass, if you don't, I will, if he escapes your sword, or if he survives such hurt as you may do him, the headsman shall have him. Mordieu, is it for nothing that I am called Louis the Just?" I stood in thought for a moment. Then, "If I do this thing, sire," I ventured, "the world will say of me that I did so to escape the payment I had incurred." "That is very true. But the world—" "Peste!" he snapped impatiently. "You are beginning to weary me, Marcel, and all the world does that so excellently that it needs not your collaboration. Go your ways, man, and do as you elect. But take my sanction to slay this fellow Châtellerault, and I shall be the better pleased if you avail yourself of it. He is lodged at the Auberge Royale, where probably you will find him at present. Now go. I have more justice to dispense in this rebellious province." I paused a moment. "Shall I not resume my duties near your Majesty?" He pondered a moment. Then he smiled in his weary way. "It would please me to have you, for these creatures are so dismally dull, all of them. Gee, we tell me, Marcel," he sighed. "Oof! But no, my friend, I do not doubt you would be as dull as any of them at present. A man in love is the weariest and most futile thing in all this weary, futile world. What shall I do with your body what time your soul is at Laverden? I doubt me you are in haste to get you there. So go, Marcel, get you wed, and live out your amorous intoxication. Marriage is the best antidote. When that is done, Return to me. That will be never, sire, I answered slyly. Say you so, Master Cupid Bardelys? And he combed his beard reflectively. Be not too sure. There have been other passions, aye, as great as yours, yet have they staled. But you waste my time. Go, Marcel. You are excused your duties by me for as long as your own affairs shall hold you elsewhere, for as long as you please. We are here upon a gloomy business. As you know, there are my cousin Montmorency and the others to be dealt with, and we are holding no levees, countenancing no revels. But come to me when you will, and I will see you. Adieu. I murmur my thanks, and very deep and sincere were they. Then, having kissed his hand, I left him. Louis XIII is a man who lacks not maligners. Of how history may come to speak of him, it is not mine to hazard. But this I can say, that I, at least, did never find him other than a just and kindly master, an upright gentleman, capricious at times and wilful, as must inevitably be the case with such spoilt children of fortune as our princes, but of lofty ideals and high principles. It was his worst fault that he was always tired, and through that everlasting weariness he came to entrust the determining of most affairs to his eminence. Hence has it resulted that the censure for many questionable acts of his reign, which were the work of my Lord Cardinal, has recoiled upon my august master's head. But to me, with all the faults that may be assigned him, he was ever Louis the Just, and wherever his name be mentioned in my hearing, I bare my head. Chapter 14. Eavesdropping. I turned it over in my mind, after I had left the king's presence, whether or not I should visit with my own hands upon Châtellerault the punishment he had so fully earned. That I would have gone about the task rejoicing you may readily imagine, but there was that accursed wager, and, to restrain me, the thought of how such an action might be construed into an evasion of its consequences. Better 1,000 times that his majesty should order his arrest and deal with him for his attempted perversion of justice to the service of his own vile ends. The charge of having abused his trust as king's commissioner to the extent of seeking to do murder through the channels of the tribunal was one that could not fail to have fatal results for him, as, indeed, the king had sworn. That was the position of affairs as it concerned Châtellerault, the world, and me. But the position must also be considered as it concerned Roxelane, and deeply, indeed, did I so consider it. Much pondering brought me again to conclusion that until I had made the only atonement in my power, the only atonement that would leave me with clean hands, I must not again approach her. Whether Châtellerault had cheated or not could not affect the question, as it concerned Mademoiselle and me. If I paid the wager, whether in honor bound to do so or not, I might then go to her impoverished, it is true, but at least with no suspicion attaching to my suit of any ulterior object other than that of winning Roxelane herself. I could then make confession, and surely the fact that I had paid where clearly there was no longer any need to pay must earn me forgiveness, and afford proof of the sincerity of my passion. Upon such a course, then, did I decide, and, with this end in view, I took my way toward the Auberge Royale, where His Majesty had told me that the Count was lodged. It was my purpose to show myself fully aware of the treacherous and unworthy part he had played at the very inception of the affair, and that if I chose to consider the wager lost it was that I might the more honestly win the lady. Upon inquiring at the hostelry for Monsieur Châtellerault, I was informed by the servant I addressed that he was within, but that at the moment he had a visitor. I replied that I would wait, and demanded a private room, since I desired to avoid meeting any court acquaintances who might chance into the auberge before I had seen the Count. My apparel at the moment may not have been all that could have been desired, but when a gentleman's rearing has taken place amid an army of servitors to minister to his every wish, he is likely to have acquired an air that is wont to win him obedience. With all celerity was I ushered into a small chamber, opening on the one side upon the common room, and being divided on the other by the thinnest of wooden partitions from the adjoining apartment. Here, the landlord having left me, I disposed myself to wait, and here I did a thing I would not have believed myself capable of doing, a thing I cannot think of without blushing to this very day. In short, I played the eavesdropper, I, Marcel St. Paul de Bardelys. Yet, if you who read and are nice-minded shudder at this confession, or, worse still, shrug your shoulders in contempt, with the reflection that such former conduct of mine as I have avowed had already partly disposed you against surprise at this, I do but ask that you measure my sin by my temptation, and think honestly whether in my position you might not yourselves have fallen. Be you never so noble and high-principled, I make bold to say that you had done no less, for the voice that penetrated my ears was that of Roxelane de Lavedon. I sought an audience with the king, she was saying, but I could not gain his presence. They told me that he was holding no levees, and that he refused to see anyone not introduced by one of those having the private entree. And so, answered the voice of Châtellerault, in tones that were perfectly colorless, you come to me that I may present you to his majesty? You have guessed it, Monsieur le Comte. You are the only gentleman of his majesty's suite with whom I can claim acquaintance, however slight. And moreover, it is well known how high you stand in his royal favor. I was told that they that have a boon to crave can find no better sponsor. Had you gone to the king, mademoiselle, said he, had you gained audience, he would have directed you to make your appeal to me. I am his commissioner in Languedoc, and the prisoners attainted with high treason are my property. Why, then, monsieur, she cried in an eager voice that set my pulses throbbing, you'll not deny me the boon I crave. You'll not deny me his life. There was a short laugh from Châtellerault, and I could hear the deliberate fall of his feet as he paced the chamber. Mademoiselle, you must not overrate my powers. You must not forget that I am the slave of justice. You may be asking more than is in my power to grant. What can you advance to show that I should be justified in proceeding as you wish? Hellas, monsieur, I can advance nothing but my prayers and the assurance that a hideous mistake is being made. What is your interest in this Monsieur de l'Esperron? He is not Monsieur de l'Esperron, she cried. But since you cannot tell me who he is, you must be content that we speak of him at least as l'Esperron, said he, and I could imagine the evil grin with which he would accompany the words. The better that you may appreciate that which followed, let me here impart to you the suspicions which were already sinking into my mind, to be changed later into absolute convictions touching the course the Count intended to pursue concerning me. The sudden arrival of the king had thrown him into some measure of panic, and no longer daring to carry out his plans concerning me. It was his object, I made no doubt, to set me at liberty that very evening. Ere he did so, however, and presuming upon my ignorance of his majesty's presence in Toulouse, Châtellerault would have certainly have bound me down by solemn promise, making that promise the price of my liberty and my life, to breathe no word of my captivity and trial. No doubt, his cunning brain would have advanced me plausible and convincing reasons so to engage myself. He had not calculated upon Castelrix, nor that the king should already have heard of my detention. Now that Roxelane came to entreat him to do that which already he saw himself forced to do, he turned his attention to the profit that he might derive from her interestedness on my behalf. I could guess also something of the jealous rage that must fill him at the signal proof of my success with her, and already I anticipated, I think, the bargain that he would drive. Tell me, then, he was repeating, what is your interest in this gentleman? There was a silence. I could imagine her gentle face clouded with the trouble that sprang from devising an answer to that question. I could picture her innocent eyes cast down, her delicate cheeks pink by some measure of shame, as at last, in a low, stifled voice, the four words broke from her, I love him, monsieur. Ah, Dieu! To hear her confess it so. If yesternight it had stirred me to the very depths of my poor, sinful soul to have her say so much to me, how infinitely more did it not affect me to overhear this frank avowal of it to another, and to think that she was undergoing all this to the end that she might save me. From Châtellerault there came an impatient snort in answer, and his feet again smote the floor as he resumed the pacing that for a moment he had suspended. Then followed a pause, a long silence, broken only by the Count's restless walking to and fro. At last, why are you silent, monsieur? She asked in a trembling voice. Hellas, mademoiselle, I can do nothing. I had feared that it might be thus with you, and if I put the question, it was in the hope that I was wrong. But he, monsieur, she exclaimed in anguish. What of him? Believe me, mademoiselle, if it lay in my power I would save him were he never so guilty, if only that I might spare you sorrow. He spoke with tender regret, foul hypocrite that he was. Oh, no, no, she cried, and her voice was of horror and despair. You do not mean that... She stopped short, and then, after a pause, it was the Count who finished the sentence for her. I mean, mademoiselle, that this l'Esperron must die. You will marvel that I let her suffer so. that I did not break down the partition with my hands and strike that supple gentleman dead at her feet in atonement for the anguish he was causing her. But I had a mind to see how far he would drive this game he was engaged upon. Again there was a spell of silence, and at last, when Mademoiselle spoke, I was amazed at the calm voice in which she addressed him, marveling at the strength and courage of one so frail and childlike to behold. Is your determination, indeed, irrevocable, monsieur? If you have any pity, will you not at least let me bear my prayers and my tears to the king? It would avail you nothing. As I have said, the Languedoc rebels are in my hands. He paused as if to let those words sink well into her understanding. Then, if I were to set him at liberty, mademoiselle, if I were to spirit him out of prison in the night, bribing his jailers to keep silent, and binding by oath to quit France at once, and never to betray me, I should be myself guilty of high treason. Thus alone could the thing be done, and you will see, mademoiselle, that by doing it I should be endangering my neck. There was an ineffable undercurrent of meaning in his words, an intangible suggestion that he might be bribed to do all this to which he so vaguely alluded. I understand, monsieur, she answered, choking. I understand that it would be too much to ask of you. It would be much, mademoiselle, he returned quickly, and his voice was now subdued and invested with an odd quiver. But nothing that your lips might ask of me, and that it might lie in the power of mortal man to do, would be too much. You mean, she cried, a catch in her breath. Had she guessed, as I, without sight of her face, had guessed what was to follow, my gorge was rising fast. I clenched my hands, and by an effort I restrained myself to learn that I had guessed aright. Some 2 months ago, he said, I journeyed to Lavardin, as you may remember. I saw you, mademoiselle, for a brief while only, it is true, and ever since I have seen nothing else but you. His voice went a shade lower, and passion throbbed in his words. She, too, perceived it, for the grating of a chair informed me that she had risen. Not now, monsieur, not now, she exclaimed. This is not the season. I beg of you think of my desolation. I do, mademoiselle, and I respect your grief, and with all my heart, believe me, I share it. Yet this is the season, and if you have this man's interest at heart, you will hear me to the end. Through all the imperiousness of his tone, an odd note of respect, real or assumed, was sounding. If you suffer, mademoiselle, believe me that I suffer also, and if I make you suffer more by what I say, I beg that you will think how what you have said, how the very motive of your presence here, has made me suffer. Do you know, mademoiselle, what it is to be torn by jealousy? Can you imagine it? If you can imagine also something of the torture I endured when you confessed to me that you loved this Lesperon, when you interceded for his life. Mademoiselle, I love you with all my heart and soul. I love you. I have loved you, I think, since the first moment of our meeting at Lavardin, and to win you there is no risk that I would not take, no danger that I would not brave. Monsieur, I implore you, hear me out, mademoiselle, he cried. Then in quieter voice he proceeded. At present you love this Monsieur de Lesperon. I shall always love him. Always, monsieur. Wait, he exclaimed, annoyed by her interruption. If he were to live, and you were to wed him and be daily in his company, I make no doubt your love might endure. But if he were to die, or if he were to pass into banishment, and you were to see him no more, you would mourn him for a little while, and then, Hellas! It is the way of men and women. Time would heal first your sorrow, then your heart. Never, monsieur, oh, never. I am older, child, than you are. I know. At present you are anxious to save his life, anxious because you love him, and also because you betrayed him, and you would not have his death upon your conscience. He paused a moment, then raising his voice, Mademoiselle, said he, I offer you your lover's life. Monsieur, cried the poor child, I knew you were good. I knew. A moment. Do not misapprehend me. I do not say that I give it. I offer it. But the difference? That if you would have it, mademoiselle, you must buy it. I have said that for you, I would brave all dangers. To save your lover, I brave the scaffold. If I am betrayed, or if the story transpire, my head will assuredly fall in the place of Lesperance. This I will risk, mademoiselle. I will do it gladly, if you will promise to become my wife when it is done. There was a moan from Roxelane, then silence. Then, oh, monsieur, you are pitiless. What bargain is this that you offer me?" "A fair one, surely," said that son of hell. "A very fair one. The risk of my life against your hand in marriage. If you truly love me as you say, monsieur," she reasoned, "you would serve me without asking guerdon. In any other thing I would. But is it fair to ask a man who is racked by love of you to place another in your arms, and that at the risk of his own life? Ah, mademoiselle, I am but a man, and I am subject to human weaknesses. If you will consent, this Lesperon shall go free, but you must see him no more, and I will carry my consideration so far as to give you 6 months in which to overcome your sorrow, ere I present myself to you again to urge my suit. And if I refuse, monsieur," he sighed, "to the value which I set upon my life, you must add my very human jealousy. From such a combination, what can you hope for? You mean, in short, that he must die?" "Tomorrow," was that infernal cheat's laconic answer. They were silent a little while. Then she fell a sobbing. "Be pitiful, monsieur. Have mercy if you, indeed, love me. Oh, he must not die. I dare not let him die. Save him, monsieur, and I will pray for you every night of my life. I will pray for you to our Holy Mother, as I am now praying to you for him. Live there the man to resist that innocent, devout appeal? Live there one who, in answer to such gentle words of love and grief, could obtrude his own coarse passions? It seems there did, for all he answered was, 'You know the price, child. And God pity me. I must pay it. I must. For if he dies, I shall have his blood upon my conscience.' Then she checked her grief, and her voice grew almost stern in the restraint she set upon herself. 'If I give you my promise to wed you hereafter, say in 6 months' time, what proof will you afford me that he who is detained under the name of Lesperon shall go free?" I caught the sound of something very like a gasp from the Count. "Remain in Toulouse until tomorrow, and tonight ere he departs he shall come to take his leave of you. Are you content?" "Be it so, monsieur," she answered. Then at last I leapt to my feet. I could endure no more. You may marvel that I had the heart to endure so much, and have so let her suffer that I might satisfy myself how far this scoundrel Châtellerault would drive his trickster's bargain. A more impetuous man would have beaten down the partition, or shouted to her through it the consolation that Châtellerault's bargain was no bargain at all, since I was already at large. And that is where a more impetuous man would have acted upon instinct more wisely than did I upon reason. Instead, I opened the door, and, crossing the common room, I flung myself down a passage that I thought must lead to the chamber in which they were closeted. But in this I was at fault, and ere I had come upon a waiter and been redirected, some precious moments were lost. He led me back to the common room, to a door opening upon another corridor. He pushed it wide, and I came suddenly face to face with Châtellerault, still flushed from his recent contest. "You here?" he gasped, his jaw falling and his cheeks turning pale, as well they might, for all that he could not dream I had overheard his bargaining. "We will go back, if you please, Monsieur le Comte," said I. "Back where?" he asked stupidly. "Back to mademoiselle. Back to the room you have just quitted." And none too gently I pushed him into the corridor again, and so, in the gloom, I missed the expression of his face. "She is not there," said he. I laughed shortly. "Nevertheless, we will go back," I insisted. And so I had my way, and we gained the room where his infamous traffic had been held. Yet for once he spoke the truth. She was no longer there. "Where is she?" I demanded angrily. "Gone," he answered. And when I protested that I had not met her, "You would not have a lady go by way of the public room, would you?" he demanded insolently. "She left by the side door into the courtyard." "That being so, Monsieur le Comte," said I quietly, "I will have a little talk with you before going after her." And I carefully closed the door.